Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I have a fun kind of head-to-head battle royale thing to do here today. These are both Strider SNGs, kind of. This one is the Protech SNG operator, so it's the all blacked out one with the tritium insert on the button, and it's a really cool knife. This is the Strider SNG CC, which means concealed carry. It's the 3/4 grind model, so it's got this hollow grind on it, and also a very cool knife. So these at this moment are technically both mine, although I sold this one today. So the money's been received. It's technically not mine, but he knows I'm filming this video. So these are both knives that I have owned and carried, and they've kind of felt out a pretty good amount. And they're the same model of knife, just built by different people. So I figured it would be fun to do kind of one of my comparison videos and see which one I think is the better buy. And this is purely going to be based upon my opinion, and my opinion alone. I will talk about my typical list of things. We'll start with the price difference to kind of establish that. And then I usually go over, I have a list to make sure I don't forget anything. Looks, action, ergos, fit and finish, value, carry, and cutting performance. So we're going to go across each of those, and I'm going to rank them. So basically, if it is the winner, it will get a point in the category. If it's the loser, it will get 0 points. In the rare event of a tie, they'll each get a point. I don't think we're going to have any of those today. So we're going to jump right into it. Let's start with price. So this version of the Protech SNG is $280 when they're available new. They've made quite a few at this point. I don't think they're insanely difficult to get, but they also aren't like readily available in stock in this configuration all the time. But this model is typically available in some form from a retailer online. And this happens to just be an expensive version at $280 because it's all blacked out. It's coated everywhere. It's got the tritium insert in the button, and it's just a different kind of more unique version. But materials-wise, it's still 154 cm blade, still aluminum handle scales. There's nothing crazy happening here to the materials. It's just kind of the way it's finished and the way it looks. I happen to think that justifies the price increase because this knife looks ridiculously cool. So this one is $280 when they're available new. On the secondary, I've even seen them go for less than that, sometimes more. It just kind of depends on timing. This one, to the best of my knowledge, this Strider, when it was new, was probably about $450. That's about what brand new Strider SNGs typically cost. I traded for this knife, and I traded a knife that was worth, I don't know, it's kind of hard to say because secondary value can be a funky thing, but I just sold this knife with some extras that are included with it. Like it has this Damascus lock bar stabilizer, I think is what they call it. Stabilizer disc, I don't know. And it has an extra clip that I don't have on it right now, but kind of a Mandalorian themed clip. And I sold it with those extras for $700. So this is significantly more expensive secondary, but I think if we're going off of new prices, this was about $450 because that's, I think, what Striders typically cost. But I didn't dig super deep to find out whether this one specifically was that. Maybe it was $400, maybe it was $500. I'm going to call it $450. So price difference from new to new is substantial, and from secondary to secondary is substantial. This knife costs way more than the Protech version, especially if you start looking at the not operator version of this Protech, where it's just the regular like stone-washed blade and like a black or a blue handle. It's going to be way less. So significant difference in price between the two of them. Now there are some differences in materials. Obviously this one, aluminum scales, 154 cm blade. It's an auto, so it's a different type of mechanism altogether. This one is G10, titanium frame lock, and 20 CV blade. So big improvement on the blade material here as well. But that's going to be our differences material-wise. So all of that considered, pricing-wise, let's jump in and start with looks. Now, I think both of these knives look cool. I've always liked the aesthetics of the SNG. I think if there's ever kind of a gripe I have with it, it's I do typically really like good blade to handle ratios, like when you've got a lot of especially cutting edge for the size of your handle. This knife does not do that. You get a very small cutting edge, all things considered, for the overall length of this knife. But I do think it looks cool. I like the lines on it. The handle profile looks very unique and has its own kind of persona to it. It's a good looking knife. I think the lock side looks good as well. The way that they finish this titanium. I'm not typically a fan of this finish when other people do it, but I find I do like when Strider does it. It's not too like multicolored. Like the stripes are just kind of like gray and dark gray, which I like. The hardware on here all looks good. I think this is a good looking knife. That said, I do think that the Protech is the better looking knife in this version. I think if you're going a basic Protech versus the Strider, I'd probably say the Strider looks a little better, but this Operator series, it just looks freaking ridiculously cool, in my opinion. I love the aesthetics of this knife. Everything is totally blacked out. There's no markings on the blade even. It's just totally sterile, and then you get the little tritium insert on the button. It looks really, really cool. Let me straighten that out real quick. There you go. Perfectly straight now. Yeah, so I'm going to give looks to this one. Bear in mind, that's probably unique to this one being the Operator series knife, because if this was a plain Jane Protech SNG, I'd say that the actual Strider looks better, but we're going to give looks to the Protech. Next category is action. Action on this knife, if you watch my review of it, I feel very underwhelmed by. You just saw I can Spidey flick this knife. That works, which is good. I appreciate that it's a hole for deployment and that I can Spidey flick it. If I get it right, it deploys all the way, but it's also like it's pretty easy to get it to not engage all the way, and it's not drop shutty at all, which not everyone wants every knife to be drop shutty, but I like it when knives are. It's just not a satisfying action to play with, and again, a lot of people don't want knives that are fun to play with. It's all tool all the time, right? I do. I want to be able to play with my knife, and this one just isn't fun. It works. You can deploy it and then use it, but it's not fun. The Protech is 50% super fun. Protech autos are super snappy. They're a lot of fun to deploy, and that is enjoyable every time. What's not so enjoyable to me on an out-the-side auto is having to close it with two hands or by pressing it up against something, or you have to kind of play this game where you just get it right with one hand, and it's cumbersome. It's not fun to close. So the Strider isn't super fun to open, and it's not super fun to close. This one is less fun to close, but it's way more fun to open. So I'm gonna give action to this one just because there is something fun about an auto that just thwacks out like that. You know, it's a lot of fun. So action is gonna go to the Protech. So we're up 2-0 Protech to Strider right now. Ergos are going to be super similar between these two. If you look at them side by side, I mean, it's literally dimensionally the same, and they are shaped the same. So the big difference for me between the two of these is going to be the thickness. Now this Strider SNG is the CC version of the knife, which means concealed carry, so it's thinner. This is a thin version. Sorry about that. The neighbor was yelling at her kid. So anyways, the difference between these two primarily is going to be the thickness. The CC Strider is thinner, and the thinness doesn't bother me in hand at all. In fact, I quite like this knife ergonomically. I like it way, way better than the versions of this knife that I've held, like the Gunner Grip that has like stupid aggressive G10. Like the type of aggressive G10 that, in my opinion, would only make sense if you're wearing gloves while using the knife. Or if your hands are so leathery that you can't feel anything anymore. Like, I don't have pansy hands. I just don't like super aggressive materials for no reason, especially when ergos are really good on a knife and the shape of the knife locks me in. I don't feel a need for any more grip on here. That said, the thinness on this one, I mostly like... The only spot where it bothers me, and I only realize this compared to the one it's sitting next to, is that it's kind of thin here. Like the material itself, each of these scales is kind of thin. So it doesn't like dig into my hand. It's not hot spotty, but it's less comfortable than this. These scales down here are remarkably comfortable to hold on to, and everything on these aluminum scales is nicely rounded. There's no harsh edges. The jimping is a bummer for me on both of these knives, frankly. I really wish I could get either of them with zero jimping. No jimping would be better than this jimping, in my opinion. The blade stock thicknesses are pretty different as well, so the jimping on this one is a little less comfortable than the jimping on this one, but overall, the handle, like the scales, the way they feel in hand, I'm going to give the edge to the Protech. For me, it's just a little bit more comfortable in hand. Not by a mile. This one's close, but the Protech does feel just barely more comfortable. And I think that's just the nature of its construction, the materials used, and kind of the thicknesses here. So Ergos is going to go to the Protech as well. That's 3-0 so far. Fit and finish. Now, this one's tricky because I'd never know whether to like call it fit and finish based on the price, what I expect for the fit and finish, or just literally compare the two of them, because it's easier when the two knives cost about the same. These do not. That said, this one got pretty easy pretty quick because I think the fit and finish on the Protech is better, and this knife costs way, way less. The fit and finish on the Protech is just borderline perfect. Like, everything is centered, it fires hard, it locks up well, everything feels right, there's no stick, everything is like, it's really, really dialed in. And it fits well. There's no blade play side to side, front to back. There's nothing wrong happening here. The Strider, I think part of why some Strider fans really like Strider is because they feel a little bit like rough around the edges. But it to me, I'd call that imperfect. Like, this one, the pivot I've had to tighten a couple of times, which is hard to do because of the way that they do this. You need like a specific spanner bit, and it's just like the lock kind of sticks some of the time. It doesn't feel as precise as the Protech does. This knife doesn't feel poorly put together, all things considered. I've certainly handled knives that felt less well put together, but I do think for the price these come in at, to me, it's not as acceptable for there to be lock stick and for there to be lock rock and for the action to just be really lackluster like it is. And this knife doesn't feel fit and finish quite like it's on the level of the Protech. The Protech is just like very precise and very good. So fit and finish is going to go to the Protech. Value. This one, I think, based on how it's been scored so far, with 4 out of 4 points thus far going to the Protech and it costing way less, value is going to the Protech. There's no comparison in my mind. I think this knife is too expensive, even at the table price. Secondary prices are wild. I traded for this knife, and now I've sold it, and I'm going to use the money that I sold it to buy more knives. Like, this knife costs way too much, in my opinion. It's much like I feel about Chris Reeve knives. These do use a better steel. And that's about all that I can say that they've done advancement-wise that Chris Reeve knives hasn't. Like, the fact that this is in 20 CV is great. I like that. The materials they're using are pretty good, but there's no lock bar insert. It's not, like, it doesn't feel all that precise. I don't feel like, I think you could do a lot better for the amount of money that this costs. And that's just the reality for me, especially if you're looking at them secondary and you're not getting one on a drop or at table price. So, yeah, value far and away is going to Protech. They're also both U.S. made by great U.S. companies. I think, in my mind, Protech is the company, frankly, that I'd rather buy from. Just seeing the people over there, the way they conduct themselves. I know a lot of people struggle with buying from Strider at all, and I get that. I think that's very fair. Protech, I don't know anybody who struggles to buy from Protech because they're good people who are doing cool things, and they're here in the U.S. And both companies are based in Southern California. Like, there's a lot of similarities there, except I think Protech is probably the better example as a whole. Yeah, so value far and away goes to Protech. Now, carry. This one is a good comparison. The Protech and the Strider both feel, to me, with my hand scales, to weigh about the same. They're both, in terms of their profile, going to be the same size this way. But like I said, the Strider is thinner. And thinner in pocket, almost without fail for me, is better, more comfortable, just nicer in pocket. So the CC SNG is unique. This is not going to be true for every SNG. In fact, this would have been much more of a slaughter if this was a GG SNG or whatever. I do not like those knives. This Strider I like, and one of the reasons why I've been most impressed with it is just because of how well it carries. I really like the way this knife carries in pocket. Neither of these have a deep carry clip. That's my preference. I would like either of them better if they did have a deep carry clip, but it carries quite well considering it is what it is. And I like how smooth and kind of contoured it is in pocket. The Protech is also very smooth in pocket. It's less kind of like rounded. It's a little bit less, I don't know, you just feel it a little bit more in pocket than you do the CC SNG. So carry is going to go to the CC SNG. Yeah, that one's a fair win for the Strider. Now, cutting performance. This one's interesting as well. So I can only go based off of what grind is on this one. This one is a 3/4 grind, which means it's a hollow grind. And I think as hollow grinds go, this one's fair. I kind of like that this one is a hollow grind in the sense that it's a little unique. I feel like I see more flat ground Strider SNGs, but it's still pretty thick behind the edge. And I think this knife, I don't know, in some ways I feel like this knife should be like super outdoorsy, and I've carried this on a few hikes. It's been a good kind of outdoor adventure knife for me. I haven't used it all that hard or anything, but in pocket it feels like it kind of makes sense for that. And when I have taken it out outdoors to cut some cordage or whatever, like it seems like a good companion for that. Mostly because this blade stock is super thick. Like it just feels robust. But I wish it was thinner behind the edge, because the actual cutting tasks that I do, outdoor knife or a regular EDC knife, thin behind the edge is usually a very good thing for me. It just means that knives cut better. And hollow grinds also, when I have put this like through cardboard, it's cumbersome because the hollow grind is not very tall. Come on. And so it tends to bind when you get up to this hump. And the fact that it's not thin down here to begin with, it doesn't like bite in and slice all that well either. So like, it's just kind of a cumbersome cutter. Not the worst. It's totally workable. If someone were to carry this as an EDC knife or an outdoor knife, I'm sure it can serve you well. It is a cutting tool that will do well. And it does have a much better blade steel. 20 CV objectively. I'll say this is my opinion to keep some people from getting mad, but it's hardly. I mean, if you look at data, 20 CV is a way higher performance steel than 154 CM. That said, the grind on this one, so first of all, much thinner blade stock. This blade stock, in terms of thickness, let me see if I can show you them side by side. They are worlds apart in stock thickness. So you're starting with a thinner stock here, which I prefer. For this one, I would consider kind of an EDC knife. This aluminum coated construction feels less outdoorsy to me to begin with, but you've got a thinner blade stock and you have a flat grind, and it's much thinner behind the edge than that hollow grind is. I haven't held it side by side with a flat ground Strider, so it's hard for me to say if the flat ground one is going to be thick like that 3/4 grind one is, or if it's going to be thin like this. But this thin blade stock plus a flat grind just equals a good slicer. This, again, is not the sliciest knife I own. It's not the thinnest behind the edge, but it's very, very good. This knife is an excellent cutter. When I've cut things like cardboard with it, which is a very primary cutting task, I think, in the year 2021 for a lot of people, this knife is better at slicing through things like cardboard. And it's also plenty capable of doing things like zip ties. And I mean, if you needed to cut some rubber hose or something, like this knife will do well. 154 CM will not hold its edge for nearly as long as 20 CV, but I think to me, I'd rather have this blade in 154 CM that's actually going to cut well, and I may have to sharpen a little bit more frequently, than this blade, which isn't going to cut as well. I'm not going to have to sharpen it as regularly, but it's not going to be as good at cutting anyway. So I'm going to give cutting to the Protech. So that means we have a 6-1 victory. Protech SNG over Strider SNG. So, yeah, I'm not really surprised, personally, how much the Protech ran away with it, if I'm being honest, because I love Protech knives, personally. Like I said in the beginning, it's going to be largely based on my opinion. I dig Protech in the way that they build knives. I like the way their knives feel. I like the way their knives function. I like the way this knife carries and cuts, and I really enjoy this knife. So I'm really glad that I had both of these simultaneously, because I've really kind of scratched the itch. I think kind of once and for all, I've figured out. I always had a hunch. I always thought I knew that the Protech was the one I prefer out of the two of these, even if they cost the same amount of money. Like, even if this was $280 and this was $280, I'd still pick this one. I like this knife better. And now I know that for sure, because I've carried and used and compared side by side both of them. And so this is the Protech SNG that I like the most in this configuration. I think it looks phenomenal. It's really cool. It scratches an itch for me, and it's cool factor. And it's also just a great, usable, wonderful knife. So this deserves to win. All of that said, I don't think that this is a bad knife. If you watch my review, you'll see I actually quite enjoyed having this knife, carrying it, using it. It carries so much better than I expected it to. It fits in my hand well. I love Strider Ergos. But all of the things that I like most about this knife, except for, I guess, the thinness, this did win and carry. Everything else that I like about this knife, I feel like I get better out of the Protech. But that's my preferences and my opinions. Other people may totally feel like this is more their speed, and that's fair. And I get why some people are into Striders, because this knife did kind of click for me in a way that I didn't expect it to while I had it. I thought it was going to be like a super easy catch and release. It was kind of hard for me to sell this knife. The only thing that made it easier is that this knife was the most expensive knife in my current collection, which felt really wrong to me, because I like other knives that I own way more than it. So that made it like a pretty simple equation of like, you can't have this be the most expensive knife in your collection. There are so many other things I'd rather own for what this goes for. So that's kind of the way it's boiled down. But ultimately, no shame. 6-1 victory. The Protech SNG is the winner. I love this knife. Really, really enjoy it. Like carrying it, like using it, and it makes me happy. It's an exciting knife to look at. It elicits a reaction because it's a cool auto that looks the way it does, and yeah, it deserves this win. So there you have it. That'll be the head-to-head, if you will, between the showdown between these two knives. Thanks, guys, for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this in some way. Let me know whether you agree or disagree, or how you land on this equation. Thanks, guys. See you on the next one.